Hello, everybody, and welcome to another edition of the Knicks Film School pregame show. My name is Andrew Claudio, a.k.a. GMAC, and it is time for another preview of another Knicks matchup, this time on Christmas Day, a matinee against Victor Wembanyama, Chris Paul, and the San Antonio Spurs, a rematch of the 1999 NBA Finals. Much different cast of characters in this matchup, much different style of play in this matchup for sure. But it does feature a San Antonio Spurs big man that is taking the league by storm early on in his career. And I'm here to find out just what planet he's from with my good friend from the Corporate Knowledge newsletter, Mr. Matthew Tynan. Matt, I will just start here because last time you were here, I opened with a story about how I grew up with my little brother, I should say. We went to San Antonio, and I spent my 16th birthday at the Wiggles. Now we're going to go in a different direction.
Okay.
I'll start by saying how much I enjoy the Corporate Knowledge newsletter. It's like my go-to for Spurs content. Anytime it jumps into my inbox, I'm like, oh, great, I get to check it on Wemby and see how he's doing. And I'll first start here and say, happy holidays. Thank you for joining me. How are you?
I'm doing well, man. Thanks for having me on. Happy holidays to you as well.
Of course. And I recently rewatched the movie Men in Black. Okay. And there's a portion of that movie where they're talking about how aliens are hiding in plain sight, but you really gotta the guys that the people you've always thought are aliens, they actually are. And they bring up Rodman at one point. And I promise I was 100% sober throughout this thought process. And it was like, if aliens were to invade, Wemby's my first suspect. That is 100% where I would go and have the MIB crew investigate first. So let's just start here as the Spurs come into Madison Square Garden on Christmas Day, and you obviously having a much closer vantage point than any of us. So have you uncovered what planet he's from yet? And when is the invasion going to happen?
Well, see, I don't know what planet he's from, but I kind of thought that maybe you would have better insight with all the drone activity over New Jersey. Like,
very true.
They're clearing the way for his family to come watch him in New York on Christmas Day. I guess that's my theory. Maybe we'll find out then.
Oh my gosh, you just cracked what these drone stories are. Like, everybody's wondering if it's government interference, if it's another country, if it's another planet. It's literally getting ready for Christmas Day. When Victor Wembanyama comes to Madison Square Garden, they've mostly been over Jersey. Now they're gonna come closer to Manhattan, and then suddenly there's just gonna be 5 of them. And the way they're gonna take over the planet is to start with the NBA and work their way out.
Yeah, it's almost like it's like a new like a rendition of Space Jam, I guess.
Yes. But it's like reverse. Instead of like taking talents, they're just putting their most talented on the court.
They're already here.
Taking over. They're already here.
Yeah,
exactly.
So the NBA is going. The NBA over the years has gone so international that they had to move intergalactic.
Indeed.
Yeah, so that's my theory.
Brilliant job by Adam Silver through that marketing.
He himself might be an alien, kind of. If you think about it.
Which would make more sense why they went intergalactic. It's less about the growing of the brand. It's literally phoning home.
That's right.
And see, we're cracking the case. And again, I promise we are 100% sober throughout this conversation. Look, all the jokes aside, what Wemby's doing is just so incredible. And it before the season, when we would make our projections at Knicks Film School and go outside the NBA to talk about, who's going to win the title, who's going to make the playoffs, what would seem to be extreme projection for Wemby, I was like, none of it's crazy. If you told me he finishes all NBA this year, it's not crazy. If you told me the Spurs made the playoffs in a loaded West, it's not crazy. If you told me he went DPOY, most improved player, all NBA, and finished top 5 in MVP, and the Spurs hosted a playoff series, I wouldn't call it crazy because of just how good and how otherworldly he has been and will probably end up being by the time he even comes close to his prime. And I guess my first question regarding Wemby from your perspective, is there a hint from him that like he's still figuring it out? Like he's still before his prime, still in his second year, only 20 or so games in, or is there a feeling from him that, oh no, nobody's in my league, like I really am a level above, and it's just about eventually like learning the NBA and how much I can take advantage of that level that I am above everybody else.
Oh no, I think he very much knows that he's still figuring things out, like still trying to understand his best spots on the floor. Still obviously growing into his frame and into his body and getting stronger. The typical developmental stuff. But no, I think when you talk to him, you do get the sense of like, I know what my potential is, but I still have a long way to go to reach it, which is the crazy thing. Because even at 20 years old, like he clearly belongs in a lot of the conversations that you just brought up. I don't think the Spurs are gonna, or he himself are gonna be good enough to really be any legitimate for him to be a legitimate MVP threat. But like all NBA doesn't sound crazy. Defensive Player of the Year sounds like just a given on an annual basis, because I don't know if you watched any of the Spurs Philadelphia game last night, but he had 7 blocks halfway through the second quarter. He gets them all over the court. He completely changes things on that end of the floor. So that's almost a given. And it's almost like there's going to be voter fatigue at certain points when he doesn't win the award. But all of this stuff is sort of in his sights. If he doesn't achieve it this year, he'll achieve it eventually. But I think there's an understanding on his end that he still has a long way to go. He's still learning how to deal with the physicality in the NBA. He's still trying to, I guess he and the coaches he's very clear about not being put in a box, because he thinks that would be a disservice to the team not to learn where he is at his best. So I do think there is still some level of experimentation going on, but things are starting to tighten up a little bit, if that makes sense. Like he's starting to kind of figure out exactly what his strengths are and really working on those going forward. So no, he knows that there's still plenty of room for improvement, which is, like I said, he's 20 years old. This is crazy. But I would say that there are still years left before he hits his prime, and he knows that too.
So I'm trying to think of the last young player, rookie into sophomore, that it was so very clear that this is going to be a thing, like for the young people watching, like with Jokic, it wasn't like this. Like it was a second round pick that developed into something. Embiid, there were questions about his health from draft night, and it was 4 years in before he could play half a season, let alone a full season, which may also not be a thing. And the other comps I go to, like Kobe was a mid first round pick, and it was a couple years before he even made an all-star team. And I really got to go back to LeBron, where there was the hype of him in high school and his games being televised. And right away, it was very clear, oh, this is one of the ones, and how he's going to be able to carry a Cleveland team when we talked last year about how the organization is recognizing what he could potentially be, a year later, is that what kind of led to the Chris Paul of it all? Like them realizing, let's get a couple veterans, let's see how competitive we could be, and understanding what this draft could end up being. We'll just say screw it and try to be as good as possible.
Yeah, I don't think that they were once they got Victor Wembanyama, like they were from the start, like regardless of the draft classes, from the start, it was year one. Let's figure this thing out, see how he operates within this system. Let the rest of the team develop around him, see what, all these young guys that they've drafted over the last several years, like see what they're made of, see if they belong with the team going forward. And then year two, like we're going to put I don't want to say like pedal all the way to the metal, because I don't think that there was any sort of realistic scenario, and I can tell you, even on their end, like they're not expecting to win a title this year. Probably not expecting to win a title in the next year or two. Like they know how long it takes to get to that level, and like as big of a leap as they're making this year, the next leap is the most difficult of all of them. So they've been in no real rush with things around Wembanyama, but one of the key factors is, and you bring up Chris Paul, and then also the trade for Harrison Barnes, they just wanted to get adults in the room, like to teach these guys how to stay composed in close games, show them the ins and outs of how you work on a daily basis, the way you take care of yourself. They wanted a veteran, not just veteran presence in the locker room, because they've had some vets over the last couple of years, but like veterans who are actually playing an integral part of your success on the court. So instead of a Doug McDermott, it's a Chris Paul. Like that, as much as I love Dougie McBuckets, like that's a different animal when you're talking about McDermott to Paul or to Harrison Barnes. Like these guys have been there before, you know what I mean? So that was the biggest thing. And Victor talked about it a lot last year, actually, like just how little experience they had on the team and how they needed to probably get a little bit more of it, get a little more veteran leadership in the locker room who can show them how to win in close games. And I actually looked up, this is prior to last night, I haven't looked since then, but last year the Spurs in clutch time had a net rating of minus 15.5. That was like 25th in the league. So far this year, they're a plus 18.5, which is 4th in the league in clutch time. And so much of that is Chris Paul keeping things organized. And a lot of it is obviously Victor Wembanyama being incredible in the fourth quarters of games. But the way that Chris Paul calms things down and shows these guys that those closing minutes of a close game is a completely different game than the rest of the 43 minutes that there are. So, and then playoff basketball is going to be a whole different animal. And now they're on an East Coast road swing and they're playing well. So they're going to be in these environments that are a little more hostile than they have been the last few years when the lowly Spurs came to town. Like it was fun to go see Victor Wembanyama, but they'll probably lose by 10. And it'll be a fun night for the home team. But now the Spurs are competitive, and things are changing rapidly, and they're learning how to deal with all of what comes with being at least a moderately successful team, if not certainly a competitive one.
So that moderate success is 15-14 through the first 29 games of the season, currently sitting at 9th, ahead of the Minnesota Timberwolves, who made a now controversial trade from this offseason. Just ask their fan base, which has been all my timeline has been, while Knicks fans are just kind of enjoying the spoils of Karl Anthony Towns and the world of
they should
5 out and stretch fives, which is why this matchup is very intriguing. I think they've played a couple games so far this year where really teams that switch are the teams that give them problems. If you're in drop coverage, they usually roast you. But this is a different type of animal where it's not only a stretch 5, but the other team's best player and most dynamic player is a stretch 5. It's a young team that I don't want to say like they don't know that they're not supposed to be as good as the Knicks, but the fact that they've been overperforming to this point in the season scares me a little bit. That look, Wemby in general is just going to be the interesting matchup to see. That not only can he be a rim protector, so when the Knicks are playing 5 out and the rim's been wide open all season, it won't matter. And then if you go 5 out and have do his thing on the perimeter and these trailing threes or just pick and pops where he rotates up to the top, it's not going to matter because Wemby can still get out to you and still cover the rim. It's what I'm most looking forward to, this type of challenge, because no disrespect to the Spurs, I don't think this is a finals preview. It's just a good test to see what this looks like on Christmas Day.
Yeah,
you bring up Chris Paul, and I'd be remiss if I didn't. I mean, this is a guy the Knicks fans thought would end up here because of how much of a relationship he has with Leon Rose and the CAA of it all. When they acquired him this offseason, And I remembered the Oklahoma City year that he spent, where that was a team that we thought was going to head toward the lottery, and maybe they'd find a home for Chris Paul at the deadline. And they were a 4 seed, and like the bubble obviously, recontextualizes what having home court in the first round meant. But that was a team that won more than they should have. And then he goes to Phoenix and they're a title contender. I guess, like, just flatly, is this the best it possibly could have gone to this point in the season? That not only are they better than expected, but he's clearly improving this young team through the first 30 games of the season.
I mean, I think to this point, it is, you couldn't ask for much more than this. If you're a Spurs fan, if you're the Spurs themselves, it's funny, like, now that they're starting to they have a winning record. They didn't, by the way, they didn't win their 15th game until March of last season. So
wow.
The fact that they have 15 wins in December is just such a massive leap from what they were last year. But the funny part of it all is, like, now Spurs fans are getting super heated whenever they lose any game, and it's turned into this, being frustrated that they're losing all the time to, expecting to be like, if they don't make the play in or maybe even the playoffs, it's a failure of a season. And it's like, whoa, step back, everyone. Like, relax for a second. It's a long year. They've done a great job getting through injuries and bringing Chris Paul into the mix. But yet, I think that where they are right now is about the best result that you could ask for. And I know that there are going to be bigger expectations down the line, but like, this is how you learn how to deal with those expectations. So I don't think that it could have gone any better than it has with the inclusion of Chris Paul and Harrison Barnes.
Well, so to follow up on expectations, like the beginning of this Tibbs era, we'll call it, in Knicks basketball, the pandemic shortened season when there were 72 games, the Knicks were projected by Vegas to win 21 games before the season. They had just drafted Obi Toppin. I know I went into that year thinking, like, get Julius Randle's value to a point where you could find him a new home. And, we're going to be aiming toward those 20 wins, and we'll see if they can add Kane Cunningham. We'll see what RJ Barrett is and Emmanuel Quickly and Obi Toppin. And we're in a rebuild under a new regime. And they're 17-16. And I'm like, let's go playoff race. I haven't been here in a decade. I can't wait. And it's the push and pull of, like, do you want to see your team succeed and,
of course,
live and die with playoff expectations? Or is the long-term vision more profitable if they sell off and try to be towards the top of the lottery spot? Like, there's two conflicting ideologies. And I've actually landed on the point where I don't think either side is wrong. You could be the Heat or the Pacers or even the Knicks in this era and never try to be at the bottom of the lottery. Or you can be the Thunder and clearly have a plan that we're going to, at a certain point, pivot to be as bad as possible and accumulate as many good young players.
Spurs too, man.
The Spurs, I mean, this is now the second time I've got to live through them picking a spot to go all in toward the top, nail the pick, and then, a generational team. So, I mean, that goes to just my question about expectations. Like, will a failure, according to the fan base, not the organization, the fan base, will they consider the season a failure if they don't make the playoffs? Or is it more rooted in, like, how good Wemby is, how much development you see from Castle or some of the other young kids? Like, what does a disappointing season for Spurs fans look like?
I think it depends on who you talk to, man. Like, I've how, generally speaking, like, Twitter can be such a negative place. So like,
I know what you're talking about.
When you talk to people, like a lot of people that are in the mentions and everything, if they don't make the playoffs, like, it's a failure, or the play-in, it's a failure. But then you talk to, like, I have my Substack chats and stuff like that at Corporate Knowledge, and people are a lot calmer there for the most part. People are a lot calmer, and, like, they see the progress that they're making right now, and in their minds, they're like, this is great. If they play 500 ball all season long, that's a success, regardless of whether or not they make the playoffs, or even the play-in. So I think the Spurs are trying to win. They are trying to get into the postseason. Whether that happens or not, who knows? But I don't think that that outcome is going to indicate whether or not the season was a failure. I think the organization is still very much in. Look, these guys are still super young. Jeremy Sohan's 21, Victor's 20, Stephon Castle is 20, Devin Vassell is 24. Like, their core is still very, very young outside of Chris Paul. And so they understand that there are still a number of developmental years ahead. Like, I would, like, we're having this conversation about what a contention window is. And I'm like, guys, they're probably not going to be title contenders for another like 3 or 4 years. That's just kind of how this goes. And if you're being realistic, like if they get ahead of schedule, great for everyone. It's going to be a lot of fun to watch. But like realistically, if you look back on and I know Wembanyama is sort of this generational talent, but it still took LeBron 7 years or so to
win his first title. He was in the finals. He was in the finals in his fourth season.
In his fourth year against San Antonio.
I'm sure you remember, in a very weak Eastern Conference.
Very, very weak Eastern Conference, and the Spurs just wiped them out. But so that's kind of when I look at this thing historically, it's like it takes a long time. The Western Conference is loaded. They might need to wait for the not necessarily wait in terms of how they operate, but there's going to be a window that opens up relatively soon when a lot of these older rosters in the Western Conference start to fade a little bit, and it looks like it might be not in the too distant future. But I still do think there's a little bit of time. And I wanted to go back real quick to Chris Paul, because you talk about the thought process of like, get him in, maybe at a certain point move him to a contender for assets or something like that. And honestly, like that was one of my first thoughts when the Spurs signed him, was like, this is going to be really interesting to see how it goes. Like, if the Spurs are doing well come February, because they've done this before where they sign a guy in the offseason and they end up dealing him for picks by the deadline. And a lot of, a number of smart GMs around the league do the same thing when they have an opportunity to get an asset on the cheap over the offseason, and then they flip it into picks. But the huge question around San Antonio is like, okay, but like, what if they're the 8th or 9th seed in the Western Conference come trade deadline? Not that they are even necessarily planning on doing it anyway, because Chris Paul does seem very invested, and they seem invested in him. But I mean, he's 39 years old, and like I said, we've seen the Spurs flip guys for parts before, for assets before, to keep the train moving down the road for after his career's over. But it's going to be fascinating to me to see how good they continue to play, or how well they continue to play, because that trade deadline might be super interesting when it comes to Chris Paul, who's playing really good basketball still at 39 years old, man. Just really cool to watch him on a nightly basis. But I do think that the organization itself is trying to find the best way to have the best of both worlds when it comes to trying to win, but also remembering, hey, we're still building this roster, and they do have a bunch of draft picks coming up. It's, probably not going to be anything super high because they have their own. They have a couple of Hawks unprotecteds. They have the Bulls. Charlotte Hornets is probably not going to convey because they're probably not going to make the postseason. But down the road, they have the Mavericks first round. They have a Timberwolves first round. They have a Kings first round. So, like, they're sort of laid out with a bunch of picks in front of them, regardless of whether or not they trade Chris Paul. But they're still trying to straddle that line between being competitive now, but also understanding that roster building is going to be critical, as well as as much as these young guys are developing, they still need to add talent to it.
Well, so is there any chance they go the other way with it? Like, so I bring up the first year Tibbs team that like they traded for Derrick Rose to bolster their playoff chances and kind of solidify both their second unit and then their closing lineup. Is there any chance that they make a move to get better and try to see if they could achieve, if it is an achievement, a playoff berth this season?
I think it will depend on the way they're looking a month and a half from now.
Okay.
I mean, I think they still are. I don't put it this way. I don't think they're sitting there right now being like, okay, I know they're not reaching and looking and saying, okay, who can we go get right now? I very much still think they want to see what this roster looks like together as it continues to grow and figures out how to play on the road and going to these new places with these new expectations and responsibilities and all that stuff. I still think they're trying to figure out what they have. Now, if they're still in this position come trade deadline, I don't think they're going to be going out and making some massive move. Like, I know De'Aaron Fox, like, agents are starting to throw the Spurs name out there because they know that Wembanyama is a threat to lure in free agents. He's a guy that other players want to play with. So, the Spurs are going to be a threat if you're talking about the trade market. But at the same time, like, I don't think the Spurs are interested in going and bringing in like a max type player or something close to that. If there was a deal at the deadline, maybe it's for another veteran role player of some kind. But I don't even think they're having those discussions internally right now. Like, obviously they're keeping their eye on the market. They're picking up the phones, all that stuff, doing their due diligence. But I don't think that that's super high on the list at this point. There's certainly, unless it's a just obvious no-brainer type of move that's going to set them up long-term, not like just this year. I'm talking about over the long haul.
Right.
I think they're probably going to continue to build those assets up. There's going to be a move at some point. I just don't think that is, in the sense that I get, is that that's not right now. But again, we'll see what they look like come the trade deadline. If they're still like playing 500 or over 500, man, I'm telling you, I'll be the first one to say I did not see this coming at that point of the year.
Yeah, something smaller, like you said, a tertiary move that's more a like just a minor upgrade at one of your rotation spots makes more sense in season. Look, I'm coming from a world where the Knicks have probably made the 3 biggest trades in the NBA in the last calendar year.
Yeah.
And 1 happened in season, 2 happened in the offseason, 1 happened right before training camp. And they all happened when I least expected them. So, who knows if De'Aaron Fox is some type of reality that could happen in season, or whether that's more of an off-season conversation to have when you're reassessing what the future of your team is going forward. The future of the Knicks and the Spurs is that they play a game on Christmas Day at noon. And I'm intrigued by this matchup, as I mentioned. Do you know offhand how many times the Spurs have played on Christmas Day? A little trivia.
Oh, man.
Over under 15.
Oh, under,
yes.
Yeah. They played a number of times on Christmas during like the big 3 era with Duncan and Ginobili and Parker. I would say they played on Christmas Day like 5 times.
11, actually. Yeah,
really?
They're 5 and 6 in their history on Christmas Day. The last time they played on Christmas was December 25th, obviously December 25th, 2016 against Jimmy Butler and the Chicago Bulls, not the Tom Thibodeau Chicago Bulls, the regime right after Tibbs was no longer in Chicago.
That was
LaMarcus
the Kawhi
Aldridge
Leonard era.
and Kawhi Leonard, that team. That's the last time they played on Christmas. Now, I come from the big market world in New York.
Every year. Yeah.
Literally, they could be on pace for 15 wins, and they're still playing the Bucks at noon. I guess no matter what happens, the Knicks are playing on Christmas. They played 56 times on Christmas. This will be their 57th in their team history. And look, I think they set it up correctly. No disrespect to Bucks fans, but I'd rather watch Wemby on Christmas than any matchup against the Giannis and the Bucks.
Yeah,
and they're bringing their biggest show to Broadway for this game. As far as this matchup is concerned, my only question would be, like, again, as a team that's 15 and 14, so literally half wins, half losses.
Yeah.
When they've won, like, what has been the common theme in their wins? And then vice versa, like, when they've lost, what has been their common theme? Because I want to know if the Knicks profile as one way or the other,
Yeah, so I mean, it will be interesting because whenever the Spurs are whenever they've played at their best this season, it's because the defense is playing well. Their defense has made a huge leap this season. Obviously, Victor Wembanyama makes a huge difference, but the team in general around him, for the most part, they still have their bad nights for sure, but for the most part, they've been much improved on that end of the court. So when the Spurs are playing well, it's almost always going to be that their defense is playing well, which is going to be really interesting against. Are the Knicks still the number one offense in the league?
They're number two, but
number two now. Okay.
When I tell you it fluctuates
right
on a daily basis. It's them and the Cavs just
right
120 offensive rating and up.
Yeah.
Club.
So with the Spurs, it's going to start at the defense on the defensive side of the ball, but maybe the biggest. The defense has largely been pretty consistent this year. What's been inconsistent is their shooting. If they're hitting their shots at a reasonable rate, I'm not even talking about like getting super hot from three. If they get really hot from three, they're actually pretty tough to beat this year. But if they're just shooting the ball relatively well, that typically means that they're having a successful night. The other thing, and I brought it up earlier, they're just playing really, really well when the game is on the line, when it gets close. And again, like that stuff is going to be tested because they've played a ton of home games. Their home road schedule has been really unbalanced. Before last night, I think it was like 18 home games to 10 road games. So yeah, 18 and 11, pretty unbalanced so far this season. And they have not been as good on the road. So I think that if the Spurs go cold again from three, that's going to be tough for them, because even though the Knicks present a lot of problems offensively, and we can get into that a little bit too if you want, the Spurs have done a pretty good job of adjusting to whatever scheme they're going against offensively. So that's going to be really interesting to watch. You brought it up earlier, the 5-out stuff and the idea of pulling Wembanyama away from the rim, and that teams that switch are the ones that give the Knicks the most trouble. The Spurs have shown that they've been pretty flexible over the course of this season in terms of how they match up with people. There will be nights where they switch a lot. There will be nights where while they typically go man, and they do play a lot of Victor in drop, because why would you not?
Yeah.
There are matchups where you can't play him in drop, and they've been able to adjust to that too, and kind of play a mixture of schemes and like these like man zone things, kind of these amorphous looking defenses where Victor is, even though he's still, like you said, a threat to cover both the rim and the perimeter, they do a good job of kind of mixing things around and making it difficult for teams that go 5-out to really get open looks, even if Victor is hanging out closer to the rim than you would think against a team that's really good. That's a very good shooting team that likes to space the floor. So this one is going to be particularly interesting, though. I think the Knicks present a different problem than pretty much any team that the Spurs have faced this year, and they're familiar with Karl Anthony Towns, from his time in the Western Conference. So it'll be really interesting to watch the Knicks offense versus the Spurs defense. I think for me, that's going to be the most interesting side of the equation.
So to add some housekeeping to what you mentioned about their home and road splits. So they're around a dead even net rating, -1 on the season, but on the road this year, they're -5.6 on the road with a 107.2 offensive rating, which would be, just for road splits, that would be the 24th in the NBA. Yeah. So we'll see if they can get their offense going. Their defense, 112.18. It's middle of the pack. That's not terrible. At least in our world,
hugely improved.
Yeah. Well, yeah. Compared to last year, the Knicks started off like bottom 10 in defense, and it's just slowly gone up throughout the season. So we're looking at a 14th in net rating. We're like, oh yeah, that's good. Yeah, that's fine. That's totally fine. To your point about fourth quarter and clutch time being the Spurs' time to shine, I'm back and forth on whether this has been an Achilles heel with the Knicks because they've won a couple close games lately. They struggled obviously in the national TV game against the Hawks that everybody got to witness, but had just pulled one out against the Raptors. They then went and pulled one out this weekend against the Pelicans, and there's a game. Know that I'm missing that they closed out. Oh, the Nets earlier in the season where they actually probably shouldn't have been that close, but the Nets have been more impressive than you'd think. The Knicks net rating by quarter is like their top 3 in first, second, and third quarters in net rating, and their bottom 3 in fourth quarter net ratings. Now, part of that is a bit of an anomaly, and the Grizzlies profile is a similar team. They're up by so much in fourth quarters that if you're not eliminating garbage time, like the fourth quarter, they're cutting 35-point leads down to 20. Like yesterday, the Knicks were up 33 against the Raptors, and they won by 14. Part of that is a Tom Thibodeau not waiting till the very last second before he's fine with the 3-point variance, taking his starters out, which Brunson and Towns fouled out yesterday, which worked so that way they could both sit for the final 4 or 5 minutes of the game. But like all in all, I don't know if the Knicks profile as like a bad fourth quarter team based on what that net rating is, or just a team that hasn't played a ton of close games. So, we'll see if this is a close game in the fourth quarter, what that could turn into and what the end result is. I know like we haven't spoken since the game in San Antonio last year. If it's anything like last year where Wemby goes for 40, 20, and 7 and Brunson goes for 61 points, and we're in for a Christmas classic, that's for sure.
Yeah, and that game was that game was incredible. That was sort of like Wembanyama had already started like his coming out party, but that was like the real I'm here type of moment. And then also with Brunson, just an incredible game. I think before that, we talked about how at the time I was like, I think Jeremy Sohan is going to be really important to defending Jalen Brunson. And then I think Sohan got hurt in like the first quarter or something, if I remember correctly. But it's gonna be fun if this thing goes down to the wire again, because like Wembanyama just continues to. Everyone calls him like, it's not like it's that creative, but like fourth quarter Wemby, because he really does have these moments where he takes over games at the most critical times. It's not every night. Last night in Philadelphia, he kind of he struggled down the stretch. He looked tired, man. He played more than he typically does last night, but it's gonna be a lot of fun to watch these teams play again, because that game is, man, if it wasn't the most entertaining game of the Spurs season last year, it was like top 2, top 3. Great game. And here's the other thing is, like, Victor's first trip to Madison Square Garden did not go well.
It was early. Yeah.
It was early. He was not good in that game. Whenever you go to the Garden and they make this whole big deal out of it, like, you want to see a great game, and that just wasn't one. So here's hoping that we get one on Christmas Day, because that is as high profile as it gets during the regular season, at least.
So what's funny about the game at the Garden, which I believe was the third week of the season last year that Wemby made his Madison Square Garden debut. What I remember about that game, obviously the Knicks won in a blowout, but RJ Barrett, Emmanuel Quickley, Mitchell Robinson all had outstanding games, 3 Knicks draft picks. And I remember our main host, Jonathan Magri, who does our post-game shows, his takeaway, as he brilliantly spoke about it, was that on a night where the Spurs, an organization known for building through the draft and building a culture that way, it's 3 Knicks draft picks that all shine. And now here we are a year and a half later, and the Knicks draft pick you're going to see on the court tomorrow is Deuce McBride. Right. Like, it's almost like they reset everything. It's like, oh, this was a team that built through the draft and everything. And now they traded all of them.
Oh, never mind.
Yeah. So much for that. It's why the Jalen Brunson thing is so fascinating, because he feels like a homegrown Knick because he rose to superstardom as a Knick.
Yeah.
And then it's almost like, because his dad is an assistant coach and his godfather is the president of basketball operations, it's almost as if he was just at college in Dallas and then he came home and now he's running the family business. Which, I mean, look, I want to get your take on what the Knicks are before we get to some questions from people watching live. But like what this season has been, as weird as a 19-10 fifth best record in the NBA start can look like it's great. It's been so much consternation to hope and try to enjoy it because we got used to the world of I'm just happy that they're playing well. I'm just happy that they're playing well. And then the burden of expectations came that it's been at times a loss is Armageddon. Like, oh my gosh, I can't believe we broke this up. We lost our identity. And I've been guilty of that too.
Yeah.
I mean, just from your perspective, the moves they made this offseason, Mikal Bridges and Cat, what was your reaction when they made them? And like, where would you put them in like the contender tiers in the NBA?
Yeah, so I mean, my reaction when first of all, was surprise. It felt like it kind of came out of nowhere. But second of all, it was like, no, I think that what they did, this is going to be a very different looking team. That's for sure. But I think what they did was raise their ceiling. And like clearly they created better spacing. The offense was going to be better. There were big question marks, I guess, about the defense. Kind of stuff that we've seen playing out. But I mean, I don't think it's any. I know that the Knicks team prior to the trade had this identity that's very, very Tibbs-like identity, and were entertaining in the sense that they were a little bit throwback, but I don't think that their ceiling was getting much higher than it was. I don't think that they were going to be able to truly compete with a team like the Celtics, or say somehow they do get through. You got like Oklahoma City on the rise right now, and I don't know how well they would have, like, if they would have been able to keep up with them, or Dallas, or I think there was a cap on what they could have become. Now, while if we're talking tiers, like, I'll probably say that I still want to see what this looks like as the season grinds on and as things as defenses tighten down closer to the postseason. But I do think that they are. You're talking about, like, would it surprise me if they're in the Eastern Conference Finals? Not at all. Like, I think a lot of people might even expect that. But I think I'm still probably looking at, like, at best tier 2 until teams like Boston. Or honestly, man, like, I know people want to crown Oklahoma City right now, and I'm very close to doing it myself, but like, Dallas is playing incredibly well again.
They are.
And they look like they're better than they were last year. So I think there's a tier that's right above the Knicks, but it's not like it's this unachievable thing this thing that they can't topple. They're all in, though. I mean, this is pretty much all in, outside of a few little moves here and there that they could potentially make, but this is it. So I think that if the simplest answer would be, I'm not sure it's enough to win the title, but I do think that for sure they raised their ceiling when they made the trade for Karl Anthony Towns.
I think and people have spoken to this on the pregame pod, like, the perspective I get from around the NBA from people that cover teams that have won titles is the importance of injury luck in the playoffs. Like, you just need to be healthy through one run when everybody else isn't. And usually the healthiest team is what wins. And to the idea that they're all in, it just has to work once. Like, they win one title, that banner flies forever, and nobody's talking about the pick package. Like, I don't know. When's the last time you talked about what the Lakers gave up for Anthony Davis? Like, it's the Russ trade that everybody's more like, oh, wow, you really screwed that up. No, they won a title with Anthony Davis. That's right. what that won. We're only talking about what the Spurs gave up. No, excuse me, the Clippers gave up for Paul George because of how it rebuilt OKC, and B, like, they never won a title. If they had, then OKC could have built this and they still would be fine.
Wouldn't have mattered.
They won a title. So that's where I'm at. Like, if they don't win the title this year, if they lose in the conference finals, even if they lose early, it's year one of a run of excellence that I mean, look, as Knicks fans who went through since that 99 finals to outside of like a fun, mellow team that I hold dear, like 25 years of, or really 20 of it being kind of dire, I'll enjoy 3-4 years of them being a 50+ win team and potentially making it into
give
May,
yourself as many bites at the apple as you can get. And like,
exactly.
the other thing is that this kind of giant core that the Knicks have is they're all young. Like it's not like this thing is gonna, relatively young. It's not like this thing is
oldest
over.
one is 30 and it's Josh Hart.
Yeah. So it's not like this thing is over tomorrow. Like this is it. No, they're all in for like the foreseeable future. And like you said, all you need is some good injury luck. Someone goes down and you have an open window to get through. Now it's just about like, okay, you have to hit on the draft picks that you do have. Make, you laugh.
I was just like, what draft picks?
Yeah,
like
right.
A swap in a year or two. Yes.
Yeah. But also like, make good use of the exceptions available, building around the fringes. The NBA has become, let's say like we were in that sort of movement, like the Suns are still sort of in it, but this idea of getting a big three together. But now the NBA has become so deep. And I think that the teams who are most successful over the long haul are the ones who have the most depth of talent. And one thing's for sure about the Knicks, like they stack right up there when you talk about that depth of talent. Maybe not like the top one or two guys on the court every night, like that whole big three model was geared to be. But they have such a good core of young players. And as long as they're able to add without like solely relying on one or two players only. So as long as they're able to build around that, like their window, like you said, forget all the picks they sent out. I know it was a lot. I know they paid a lot for these guys. That Mikal Bridges trade is still just crazy to me. But
it's glaring. Yeah.
It's glaring. Yeah. But look, like you said, like the window doesn't close tomorrow. Like that thing, as long as they're willing to deal with the luxury tax implications, which is obviously going to be a thing. But let's see what you're made of, Dolan. But as long as they're willing to deal with that and like they draft well and make the signings on the fringes, like this window is going to be open for a while. And they just need, like you said, just the 1 year, man, just the 1 year.
Yep. So want to get to some questions from people watching live before we get out of here. First, from Mr. Jonathan Macri, is this the peak of fandom? The pressure only goes up from here. Does it get any better than A, being good, B, having Wemby, and C, playing with house money?
This is what I was talking about earlier, that it makes me laugh how like we've already reached the point where like when I'll write something or talk about a certain thing or just after every game, Spurs fans are finding something to be mad about. And I'm sitting back like confused. Like, you guys, they're ahead of schedule right now.
Are you not entertained? Indeed.
Are you not entertained by this? They're playing a really fun brand of basketball. They have 1 million draft picks. Like, their superstar is 20 years old, and the 4th overall pick, Stephon Castle, is playing extremely well and looks like he's going to be a hit. It's one of these things where it's like, this is going not only as expected or as they'd hoped, but probably a little better than they'd hoped. And they were already pretty damn hopeful, all things considered. So like, yeah, everything is just going incredibly well for them right now. And I say that, knocking on wood, because we'd hate to see some crappy injuries take over on a fun season. But yeah, I mean, this is you. I think that if you're watching this as a Spurs fan, like the ones who I've talked to who are the most balanced, who have it together the most, are like, no, they kind of sit back and say, like Jonathan said, this is house money. Everything is going swimmingly. We know that they're not going to win a title this year. So, and in San Antonio, that's what it's about, and it still is. So, and it's like, you say the Knicks are there for one, the Spurs are looking at like, no, we want to win several again. We want this to be the next Duncan era. And it might be, who knows, long way to go before that's determined. But the Spurs are playing with house money right now. They really are. This is all just like a fun little, I don't know, play and run, maybe even, holy crap, get to the first round of the playoffs. Like, that would just be gravy. Unless you're the type of Spurs fan that's like, get all the way to the end and then let's not make the playoffs so we get a lottery pick.
Yeah.
There's also those fans too. That's for sure.
Unfortunately, they're in the West, but like the Eastern Conference pods I've done this year with people from the Pistons and even the Raptors the other day. The Raptors are 7-23, so they probably don't apply here. But like, there's a world you make the play-in and lose in the East, and you're like the 8th best odds because of how bad the East is. So you can have your cake and eat it too. In that sense, the Spurs, unfortunately, could have the same record as the 7th seed in the East and end up in the play-in. And so it may not work that way. I liken it to remember the year that the Pelicans made the first round and they were in the 9-10 and then beat the Clippers, who didn't have Paul George because he had COVID. And this is really competitive first round where they were like America's team against the Suns. Yeah. And they like pushed Chris Paul and Devin Booker to 6 games, and Alvarado and Herb Jones looked great. And it was like, oh, the future is bright. They're going to get Zion back. The Spurs are obviously significantly more talented at the top, but it's that could be the potential dream outside of like getting into the lottery and striking gold there. Like, getting through the play-in, showing out for 6 games against OKC, and then it's like, oh, they're coming. Like, that's a team that a year or two from now will be the conference finals for all we know. So we'll see.
And when I say that, like, there's that idea of you lose in the play-in, you're still in the lottery. I'm telling you right now, though, that's not the Spurs mentality anymore. Like, maybe it would have been the last couple of years, but no, they want to win. They want to win right now. Not they're realistic, you know what I mean? But they want to win as much as they possibly can. Like, it's all relative. But if they're in that position where, like, if they make the play-in, or they're right on the edge of it, I don't think they're gonna pull a Dallas Mavericks, where they sit everybody on the last night of the season just so they can keep their freaking lottery odds.
You do remember which team that was supposed to get their pick if they ended up 11th or higher, right? It was the New York Knicks. And shout out to Cam Whitmore, Villanova's own, that would have ended up in the Knick uniform probably if they had gotten that pick. I more respect the chess move that the Mavericks did and the NBA incentivizing it than the nature in which the Mavericks went about eventually ending up with Derek Lively. So the other element of this, you say, like, telling fans to take a deep breath. Speaking of John, our Patreon pod is where we talk about the league at large. And if I can plug it, yesterday we did the top 5 most franchises in the NBA. And there was one point where because we disagreed about Minnesota, and I think they should be like top 3. And he's like, they have Ant. Like, at the end of the day, once fans take a deep breath, they'll realize they have Ant, Julius. This thing might just be a year and we're good. And I think that deep breath is so essential if you're a Spurs fan. Like, anytime you're frustrated that they just lost and the game was close and it was annoyed, take a deep breath. We have Wemby. He's 20. We're way ahead of schedule. Like, it's the deep breath teams that are the most intriguing.
Yep.
Next up from Armand Bernage, is there anything, or if anything, the Spurs are or can do to mitigate injuries based on Wemby's size?
I mean, so far he's been pretty healthy. I think there have been some, there's what we kind of he's such a, I don't know if you guys have seen like the videos of his workout routines or his stretching routines. Like,
I haven't. No.
This is a 7'5" guy who can do the splits, like the full splits. He's been training to be in this sort of position his whole life. He's just incredibly flexible, takes care of his feet, his dexterity in his hands and fingers, his toes, everything. He has a routine where he walks on his toes and fingertips. They do everything within their within the realm of possibility to keep him healthy. They also have this brand new training facility where there's going to be like medical research being done on the side. Like they're doing literally everything they can to keep this guy healthy. We were kind of talking about this recently just because of how nimble he is and flexible he is and all this stuff. I don't even know if it's like the ligament or muscle stuff that should be the biggest concern. There's just so much surface area of his bones. So like you see these collisions and it's like, you know, his femur is like the size of my torso.
Right.
And it's like, you know, there's so much room to slam into his leg or whatever the case might be and fracture something. Like I think like we just saw with Chet Holmgren, you know, he falls on his hip and there's not a lot of meat there, but there's a lot of surface area for a 7'1", 7'2" guy, and he cracks his hip. He's 23 years old or whatever. But I think that it's the freak stuff that you can't avoid that is probably the biggest concern. Outside of that, the Spurs are doing everything humanly possible from a training standpoint, from a sleep standpoint, from a diet standpoint, monitoring standpoint, to do everything they can to mitigate injuries for him going forward. Like I said, my biggest concern would just be the freak injury that like you had earlier this season. Anthony Davis slammed into his knee with his own knee, and Victor missed like a week or so, a week, 8 days, something like that, with like a deep bone bruise that just like really, really flared up. And in his knee. So like it's that kind of stuff. Or like he had some back issues earlier this year. That's a concern over the long haul for a guy who's 7'5". Like, you know, it's the stuff that is unavoidable or the stuff that you can't really prepare for, I think would be the biggest concern, because they're doing everything they can. At a certain point, it's up to God or whoever they worship.
Yeah. Hearing that they've invested in a research facility basically as their practice facility tells me that they are, to Armand's question, they are doing everything they can, you know. And look, we're in Knicks world, coming from the world of Porzingis, where it started off, he's a unicorn. This is insane. One land incorrectly on the knee, and he's never plays another game for the franchise, and really proves to be more of a complimentary piece that, like, even last year has not proven he can play through 4 playoff rounds, just be on an all-time great team that doesn't need you until the finals, and you could win a ring. But I think, like, there's a world where Wemby is more in the Mikal Bridges build, where yes, the freak injury can happen, but he's just like made of rubber. Like him being lanky doesn't necessarily mean injury prone. It just means like just that, like he's that type of build where, and I've been talking to people that might be concerned about Mikal Bridges' minutes. It's like, we have not been proven yet that he will miss time.
There's
with
no
anything.
evidence.
He's literally never missed a game. It's him playing for Tom Thibodeau is the ultimate test case.
It is
of both extremes. Which one's gonna win out? So we'll see. Last question.
And I urge you, if you
haven't,
sorry to interrupt. I urge you, if you haven't seen this stuff, like Google, whatever, Victor Wembanyama workout routine or Victor Wembanyama flexibility routine, stuff like it really is wild, just crazy stuff to watch. But yeah, they since he was like 12 years old, they've been investing in keeping his body healthy, and he really hasn't had any major sort of injuries, and he's played professional basketball for several years now. So we'll see. Like I said, it's up to the gods probably, because they're doing everything humanly possible to mitigate it.
But as we opened, we have no idea whether he's even human, so we may be dealing with something extraterrestrial.
Full circle.
Look at me. We call that a callback in the industry.
That's right.
There you go. Last question on a bit of a somber note. from Ben Kim Gervy. How is Pop doing? There's question about whether his health and his outlook could change the timeline or runway of the team. Who's next leader up? I mean, you can answer like what it means long term. I'm more just curious about like how he's doing, and what's the latest on Greg Popovich, who unfortunately for those who may not be aware suffered a stroke earlier this year, has not been on the bench for a couple weeks now. Maybe
he suffered the stroke November 2nd, so it's been almost 2 months.
Almost 2 months, yeah. So what's the latest on Coach Pop?
Yeah, so I'm told he's doing well. He actually put out a press release or a statement like last week or something like that, and basically saying like, I'm doing well. I've heard the fan support. I've seen it. I've read it. Thank you all so much. All this stuff. I'm doing everything I can to get back to the bench. He threw some humorous stuff in there, like the people who are working with him can't wait till he gets back to the bench so they don't have to deal with him anymore. But I'm told he's doing well. He's got after suffering a stroke, going through treatment and therapy and stuff like that to sort of make sure he's healthy. And I mean, coaching on an NBA sideline is a big deal. Coaching an NBA schedule is a big deal. I do expect that at some point this season he'll be back. I don't know at 75 years old, how much longer this career is going to go on. I know how much he loves coaching still, and obviously the respect that he gets from both players and everyone around the organization is still immense. But you just with a health scare like that, you certainly and for sure he's getting a chance to step back and sort of reflect on things. And as far as like what the runway might look like, I don't think things change in terms of how they approach everything. They're still in constant communication with Pop. Like he's talking with the coaching staff, RC Buford in the front, Brian Wright in the front office. Like they're in constant communication. Everything they're doing is installments from everything that Popovich put in place before the season started. So not much has changed in that capacity, but I think the big question mark in what we're watching right now is Mitch Johnson the next guy? Like whenever Pop does decide to retire, like is Mitch Johnson going to be next in line? He's been with the organization for 9 years. Really smart basketball guy, really well respected around the league. A kind of a quieter guy, and assistants in San Antonio are largely under the radar. They don't talk to anyone when it comes to the media. So a little bit quieter profiles, but like look around the NBA at how many assistant coaches, former Spurs assistant coaches are NBA head coaches and on other benches. So I think that given his familiarity with the team, given the respect that he has within the organization, I think that if you're putting a wager on who's next in San Antonio, I think that I would probably put my money on Mitch Johnson, but that is probably a little bit premature at this point. But certainly a reality that we have to look at. It will be crazy when the day comes that Greg Popovich is not the guy on that bench. And by the way, every win they get this year without him on the bench still is added to his resume because he's the head coach. But
that worked out great, yeah,
which is pretty funny, I think. But anyway, yeah, that would be a long-winded answer. Short-winded. Pop's doing well. Just getting work in from a therapy standpoint, and I do think that he'll be back at some point this year. Just don't know for how many games.
Yeah. Well, I obviously wish him the best. I know Knicks fans everywhere wish him the best. And as far as the franchise is concerned, the Spurs are a team I know the 99 finals exists as a thing where I'm supposed to be holding a grudge against
26 years ago, man, 25 years ago.
It's also like the Knicks were an 8th seed. Like once they got there and didn't have Ewing and any notion of like they're better off without him. Was, you know who we could probably use for these twin towers, this Robinson Duncan front court that we're facing? Patrick Ewing. That would be probably really good this series. But I have nothing against. I do know there are Knicks fans that still hold something against the Rockets for '94.
Oh, interesting.
But like the '99 season,
30 years ago,
right? But like that at least went 7, and there was an either or of it. '99 is the first year I watched the Knicks as a fan. Like I started as a Michael Jordan fan. Then he retired, and then I went to the hometown team that went to the finals. And my naive self was like, "Oh, this is gonna be every year." We went to the finals my first year, the conference finals my next year. Every year is gonna be like this. And then the next 24 years happens. But regardless, I am excited to see Wemby on Christmas, and I was excited to have a conversation with you to preview this game, Matthew. Thank you so much for joining me. Before you get out of here, please let the fine folks at home know where they can find you and the Corporate Knowledge newsletter.
Yeah, you can read my stuff at matthewtynan.substack.com. It is the Corporate Knowledge newsletter, and also I need to do it more often, but I have a podcast called Small Market Bias. So you can hear me talk about the Spurs and other NBA stuff there as well. But yeah, man, I appreciate you having me on. I really, really am just rooting for a good game tomorrow. An entertaining game, because the first edition of Wemby versus the Knicks in Madison Square Garden was a little bit of a dud. So hoping for an entertaining way to kick off NBA stuff tomorrow.
I'll wrap here. Small Market Bias be the name of your podcast. I allege that after an offseason where Isaiah Hartenstein chose Oklahoma City over New York City, that small market bias is a myth. It doesn't exist anymore. The NBA has weeded it out with the new CBA restrictions and some stupid rule that capped the Knicks at what they could spend. I much prefer baseball, where both New York teams offered Juan Soto $760 million, and he just picked one. But yeah, in the NBA, the small market bias isn't a thing. I understand this. There was a part of our conversation where I said one team is played on Christmas 56 times and the other team is 11. And one franchise has had much more success than the other over the last 25 years. But that's just my theory, and I'm sticking to it.
It's okay, man. It's okay. We'll look past the fact that no matter whether they're good or bad, the Lakers and the Knicks are going to play on national TV like 45 times a year. And if the Spurs are even average, they'll be on national television 8 times a year. Listen, I didn't say it was a good theory or a strong one or that. I just said it's my theory. Okay. Matthew, happy holidays. Merry Christmas to you and yours. And thank you to everybody that tuned in for this extended edition of the Knicks Film School pregame pod. We try to do this before every game. Obviously, we did this the day before to the Christmas Day matinee against the Spurs. If you dug it, please head over to iTunes, drop a 5-star rating and a review. If you're watching, like the video, remember to subscribe. I'll be back after the game tomorrow. I'm doing the post game on Christmas Day, so join me to recap the Knicks against the Spurs, and then our pregame show. The next one will be on Friday to preview the next matchup against the Orlando Magic. But until next time, thank you for listening. Thank you for watching. Enjoy the game. Happy holidays, and I will speak with you soon. Peace.